there in the YouTubeverse. It is Max, and I am back at you with more Lorcana content. First and foremost, before I dive into this one, just want to take a minute to thank everybody for the wonderful reception we had to our first video on leveling up your game in Lorcana. It's what we're here to do. We're taking an audience suggestion for this particular video of kind of going over archetypes, not necessarily breaking down every archetype into its main components and what it does and how you do it, but how to approach a game depending on what kind of deck you're playing. Keeping this very broad strokes, but we are going to go over every archetype and how you should approach the game, beginning, middle of the game, and hopefully closing out the game with each of the 4 major archetypes. So stick around. Hopefully this is a good one for you. And again, feel free to leave any feedback you have on the video. We'd love to hear it. Thanks a bunch. Hope you enjoy this one. So, what am I talking about when I talk about archetypes? For the purposes of this video specifically, I'm going to be talking about 4 different deck archetypes. I know there are many kind of sub-archetypes in there, kind of like if you think about music, there's your genres and then there's your sub-genres of music, not dissimilar to the way there are archetypes and sub-archetypes. I'm going to be talking about combo, aggro or aggressive, mid-range, and control for the purposes of this video. Diving right into the first one, we have the aggressive deck. The aggressive deck is trying to end the game quickly. As their name implies, they are out on the front foot. If you watched the last video, I referenced the great article by Mike Flores, Who's the Beatdown? And the aggro decks always try to lead the game by being the beatdown. When it comes to the exact opposite side of the spectrum, you have a controlling deck. They are trying to be completely reactive, and they are often trying to defeat the opponent by an overwhelming amount of very powerful cards that trade many for one, and a bunch of card advantage to be able to draw more cards to leverage a victory. In the middle of that, you have mid-range. Mid-range can lean towards more controlling, it can lean towards more aggressive, and we've seen versions of both in Lorcana. This is one of the harder archetypes to play because you have to kind of define your role as you're able to do a little bit from column A and a little bit from column B. Finally, the deck we really haven't seen a dedicated version of, though there are kind of shades of it, is combo, where you are trying to execute a few different cards together that, when played, will win you the game. So let's go ahead and get started with each part of the game. So here we are at the opening. We're looking at 7 cards, deciding what we're going to mulligan, and deciding what the first few turns of the game look like. Obviously, immediately out of the gate, you can kind of start to understand how the deck you're playing will inform those choices. So for the aggro deck, we're looking to keep very small characters that we can play and hopefully play out on a good curve, right? So for example, in an Emerald Amethyst deck, we want to keep something like Pascal into Flynn Rider, into the Cheshire Cat, so that we have a game plan to proceed over the first few turns. Now we can keep cards like Kuzco because you want to make sure that you also can close out that game, and some of those cards are so critical to the game plan and to winning that you can sometimes keep one. However, that changes a lot when you're talking about something like the Ruby Amethyst control deck, because now all of a sudden you really have to be careful because your deck runs such a high number of uninkables. So your first couple of turns really need to be good, strong setup turns that allow you to ink things as well as be able to react to whatever the other decks are doing. So these hands look very different, right? In the aggro side of things, we want to keep cheap, small characters. On the control side of things, we're more worried about hitting our inkables and having cards like Friends on the other side to be able to get us into a mid to late game and not be completely back-footed. So it's a very different approach to your opening hands. The mid-range decks have a similar problem in that they have to try to figure out what game plan can they enact. So for example, if you're playing a steel-based mid-range deck, you will often keep a hand that has Prince Eric in it, even if when you come to find out that the matchup may not be good for Prince Eric. And that's okay. One of the beauties of Lorcana is we have this mechanic that allows us to ink certain cards. So if we find out we're playing against the Amethyst Ruby control deck, we just ink Prince Eric, and that's okay. But we still need to keep Prince Eric because we may need to respond to the player who's playing that Emerald Amethyst aggro deck, and we may need to answer that Flynn Rider or that Cheshire Cat, and Prince Eric is kind of the perfect way to do it. So you can kind of see the tension, even talking about keeping our hands. That's all we've talked about. 2.5 minutes I've been babbling about keeping our hands. That's it. And you can see how complex that is just when it comes to the mulliganing decisions. Then we have to talk about knowing what our opponent is doing. The better you get at Lorcana is the better you get at knowing the decks that are popular, knowing the decks that people play. Knowing what I'm going to refer to a lot in this content is play patterns. Understanding that, okay, my opponent is playing Amber and they have played Lilo. I am understanding very clearly that there is a good chance that they are going to follow that up on turn 2 with a Simba Protective Cub. I know this because I've played the game. It's harder to be good at the game when you don't know the cards. So learning the cards and learning the play patterns of those cards is really important. That's going to help inform the decisions that we make. It's a reason why keeping Eric is really important. Knowing when to use Eric is important. Do we wait until we are able to go dispatch Simba, dispatch Lilo in one turn? Do we just wait in general? On the whole, because we're just looking to play a couple grab your swords. You know what? I'm just going to wait. I'm going to aerial and go grab your sword on turn 5. That's totally fine. But you have to have a plan. You have to know what your opponent's doing, and you have to know how to beat them. That's the key. Know your game plan. That is kind of the thesis statement of this whole video, and it's very important in the beginning. So to kind of walk us back through that process, look at your hand, decide what you're going to keep based on what gives you a game plan. Is it, okay, I can answer the early parts of the game, and I can start to proceed into the middle of the game, not being completely back-footed. Or for an aggressive or combo deck, is it, do I have the key elements that really impact the board in the beginning or work together to win me the game? So very similar kind of thought patterns no matter which deck you're using, but the building blocks are a little different. On the aggressive and combo side, you want to be able to have the pieces you need, the key pieces. On the mid-range and control side, you often want to be able to have enough to interact with something and not get put on the back foot right away, and then be able to proceed into the mid-game being ahead, knowing that you generally play a longer game. So that's the key. Really is kind of leveling up through knowing what your deck does very well, knowing the play patterns in that deck, and having an idea of the powerful cards and powerful play patterns that your opponent can have. It'll really help dictate, and the thing that will help you get better and level up your game is learning how and what cards are key in the opening hand so that you can make sure that your opening your mulligan and your opening couple of turns are very well thought out. Remember, one of the hardest parts of this game is inking. The better you get at inking, the better you will get at Lorcana. It's, to me, in my head, it's just a chart with two lines going straight up. The better you are with mulliganing, the better you are with inking, the better you are at getting ahead in the game, the better your game gets on the whole. They both just follow the same exact structure. That's really the focus, is those opening couple of turns. You can lose the game with a poor mulligan. You can lose the game inking the wrong cards in the first couple of turns. So knowing what your deck does, knowing the play patterns of your deck, and knowing what your opponent is trying to do, and can you disrupt or ignore that, those are the really critical elements.